Dear students, on this session, we'll learn the summary of the lesson Gentlemen of Rio in Media. This lesson tells us about a true incident. It's about Dan Anselmo, who lived in Rio in Media. He had wished to sell his land. This land was bought by the Americans for just $1,200. He sold his land and house to them. The Americans replastered the house and repaired the fence. Very soon, the local children ran through the territory. That's when the Americans came to know that Dan Anselmo had not sold the fruit-bearing trees. They belonged to the people of Rio in Media. This lesson tells us about the importance of preserving land. One must take care of trees to preserve the environment. About the author, John A. Cedillo was born in New Mexico. He worked as a lawyer and held public office. He wrote about Mexico and southwestern United States. The given story is based on an actual legal case. Let's go for lesson. There lived an old man named Don Anselmo. He lived up the mountains in Rio in Media, Spanish for river in between, where his people had lived. He tilled the same land his ancestor had tilled. His small house, wretched and quaint, had been inherited from his mother. A little creek ran through his land. His orchard had lovely fruit trees that were green and beautiful. After months of negotiation, he sold his land and house for $1,200 to the Americans. On the day of the sale, Don came to the lawyer's office dressed in a pale green old and faded Prince Albert suit. He looked like his ancestor Caton. He looked like a Senator Catron. He wore war-torn gloves and had a cane, which was the skeleton of a worn-out umbrella. Accompanying him was one of his innumerable kin, a dark young man with eyes like a gazelle. Don bowed to all and sat down after removing the hat and gloves slowly. He handed them over to his kin. After a usual discussion about the Rhine and his large family, the lawyer told Don about a surveyor report that the land he had shown was more than 8 acres and that the Americans were ready to pay him extra money for the extra land he would sell. Don Anselmo refused to accept extra money. He remained adamant and felt insulted at the mention of extra money. After signing the papers, he put the money on his gloves and hat and walked out with the boy. The Americans moved into the house after they had got it replastered. The trees were pruned and the fence repaired. A month later, the complaint to the lawyer, the acquired property, when spoken to, they simply laughed and talked back good, nurture in Spanish, and nature will be fine. The lawyer sent word to Dan Anselmo to come to his office for a meeting. Dan Anselmo came again, accompanied by the dark boy. He was clad in the same faded cutaway and carried the same stick. The lawyer explained about the local children overrunning the property Americans had brought from Dan, and as the eldest member of the community, it was Dan's duty to stop the children. Dan Anselmo explained that the Americans were no doubt good neighbors and good people, but he had only sold the land and not the trees, for the latter belonged to his people. The lawyer explained to Don that he signed the deed wherein he had sold the land, the house, and all that grew on the land, including the trees. Dan Anselmo explained that every time a child was born in Rio in Media, he planted a tree, and so those trees belonged to people and not to him. Hence he had no right to sell the trees, for they belonged to the children. The lawyer realized that though the Americans owned Dan's property legally, his generosity in accepting a lesser selling price for his land and his property had to be respected. Eventually, the Americans bought the trees individually. It took them till the following winter to buy all the trees from the descendants of Rio in Media. Thank you. Dear students, on this session, we learn the summary of the lesson, Gentlemen of Rio in Media. This lesson tells us about a true incident. It's about Dan Anselmo, who lived in Rio in Media. He had wished to sell his land. This land was bought by the